Welcome to the 700 Club. I want to ask you a question. Who has more people locked up? What nation is the worst in the country? Is it China? Is it Russia? No, no, no. It's the land of the free and the home of the brave. America has the largest population of prisoners in the entire world. Why? Because hundreds of thousands of regulations that carry criminal penalties. What's the cost of locking so many people up? Hundreds of billions of dollars, not to mention what happens to the torn up lives of people who are ensnared in the system. Jennifer Wisher explains about the nation of criminals.
Two major stories dominating the headlines for weeks find themselves at a controversial crossroad. The COVID-19 lockdown and protests following the death of George Floyd are bringing renewed focus on law enforcement and America's freedoms, or lack thereof. We first saw this when citizens who dared to break government quarantine orders or protested to reopen their states were threatened with criminal prosecution. Something Timothy Head of the Faith and Freedom Coalition writes is a dangerous misuse of criminal law.
We're seeing that kind of heavy-handed approach across the country, literally impacting every single human life in the United States of America right now.
And during this wave of civil unrest and protest, we've seen peaceful demonstrators, even journalists, arrested, pepper sprayed, and shot with rubber bullets like criminals for exercising their constitutional rights. A demonstration, some say, of America's problem with over-criminalization.
If we end up criminalizing conduct that your average person would never have recognized was wrong, then people will all of a sudden lose respect for the rule of law.
These are regulations people break unwittingly because it doesn't seem like behavior that would or should be criminal. And they're everywhere. In North Carolina, for example, counties, cities, and towns, even metropolitan sewerage districts have the power to create ordinances that automatically carry the punishment of a Class 3 misdemeanor. And on the federal level, efforts to count the number of regulations with criminal penalties have been abandoned because it's an impossible task.
I've seen the estimate of at least 300,000, it's probably more like 400 or 500,000 regulations that carry criminal penalties.
And the fact is, it's hard to get them off the books. President Trump could sign an executive order directing agencies to get rid of regulations with criminal penalties. But it wouldn't happen overnight. To do it legally would take years. So during this time of civil unrest, there's actually something that unites Americans. There is no one in the United States over the age of 18 who cannot be indicted for some federal crime. That is not an exaggeration, says John Baker, a retired LSU law professor. For years in a number of cities, from Flint to Shreveport, wearing saggy pants was criminalized, a regulation that disproportionately targeted young black men for sporting a popular fashion trend despite its controversy.
When the same law is applied differently or has different impacts in different constituencies and communities, it makes all of us actually fundamentally suspicious of the system.
And that suspicion has reached a boiling point.
We don't want no more police. Is that clear? We don't want people with guns toting around in our community, shooting us down.
In New York, the nation's largest city, Mayor Bill de Blasio vows to cut police funding. In Minneapolis, the city council has voted to dismantle its police department.
Our commitment is to end our city's toxic relationship with the Minneapolis Police Department, to end policing as we know it.
And in the midst of this debate over policing and crime, many Americans are hopeful the nation's problems with over-criminalization will begin to be addressed.
When light shows up, darkness has to go away. So we're hoping with all this light that all the darkness will go away and stay away.
I hate to have this discussion with that nonsense of defunding the police. I mean, it's just a nightmare to think, but Minneapolis is maybe on the way to doing it. But who then is going to, if there's a 911 call, who's going to answer the call? and somebody's breaking into my house. Well, tough luck. The police isn't available, 911, nobody to answer your call because we've just defunded it. Well, that's nonsense, and nobody's going to go along with that, and anybody who does for it is going to be crazy. But before all this happened, the United States still had on the books, can you imagine, so many criminal penalties that people can't even count them. Is it 300,000? Is it 400,000? Is it 500,000? 100,000 regulations. Our Washington correspondent Jennifer Wishon joins us now. And Jennifer, why can't the president just sign an executive order, at least in relation to these federal agencies, to nullify some of these laws?
Well, Pat, he certainly can. And I can tell you, a few weeks ago, he actually did something similar to that with the economy. He is, as you know, desperately trying to get our economy back on track. And so he signed an executive order directing his agencies, and I have the language here, to rescind, modify, waive, or provide exemptions from regulations that inhibit economic recovery that are consistent with the law and that do not that protect the public health and safety. And so he did that citing this current economic emergency that we're in. So certainly the president could direct his cabinet secretaries to take a look at the regulations under their purview that have criminal penalties and work to get rid of them. The issue, as you said, Pat, is that there are hundreds of thousands of these. I mean, as I reported, there have been efforts to actually count them, and people have given up. These are smart people, and they just say there's too many. We're already at 300,000, and we're done. We're not going to keep counting. And so it's a problem. And the other part of that is that if you go through the normal process, which we've seen the president doing, he's already slashed a number of regulations throughout his first term. It's a long process. So when these agencies get a law from Congress, they have to figure out what it is Congress is trying to do. They have to write the regulations, and then there's a public comment period. So when you get rid of one, it's kind of the process in reverse. It takes a long time. So I think if you're trying to get rid of all of these, or even a fraction of these, it's going to take a long time. But certainly this is something the president could take a look at and speed it along.
Well, Jennifer, if somebody is labeled as a criminal, say he's 18 years old, say he's a black guy, and he went into the convenience stores and he put some gum in his pocket, and they pick him up and they say that's a felony, you just, that's larceny, you stole something, and so he gets a felony conviction. What happens to him the rest of his life?
Well, it depends on where he's locked up. I mean, states are very different. And of course, politics change in states. But, this is, I mean, you mentioned the societal impact that this has on families and on communities. And I know that we've talked about these three strikes laws. So in some cases, you have young people that have gotten into some trouble, and then they get caught stealing a pair of socks or some chewing gum at a convenience store. 3 strikes and you're out, and they are serving a life sentence. And again, think about the toll that takes on that person's life, on their family's lives, and also to the taxpayer. It costs about $30,000 to $60,000 a year per inmate, depending on what state they're in, to keep them incarcerated. $60,000 is a salary a lot of Americans would certainly like to have. And so it is a huge cost to society, both morally and financially.
Well, Jennifer, if somebody has a felony conviction, he or she can't run for office. They can't be a member of the bar. They can't be a police officer. I'm not even sure in certain areas whether they can vote. I mean, you've taken away most of their privileges as a citizen. Is that right?
That's right. That's right. And so that's a big problem that a lot of Americans have. And they say, look, if you've done the time and you get out, then you should be able to have your rights restored as a human being or as a citizen of this country. My husband's an attorney, and he is often working to with people to get their gun rights restored and their voting rights. But again, that's a process. That's an expense that people have. They have to get through this barrier after they have served their time.
You know, it's just horrible to comment, but I was listening, I just happened to flip across that show called The Doctors, and they had an eminent psychiatrist talking about the brain of a young person, and he said basically until a person is about 25, 26 years old, the raging hormones that are going on inside, even though his prefrontal cortex may be formed, that he can't really control all these things he's doing. And if he gets put arrested on one of these charges, he's ruined for life. And yet, in a sense, he's maybe just a teenage prank, and yet he's got a felony conviction. All the rest of his life, you can't expunge it, can you?
That's right. I mean, there are ways to do it, but it's not easy for the average person to get past that. So you're right. It is a mark for life. For life. We have one life to live. And so that is a heavy burden for so many people who are locked up in America. And you said it, Pat. I mean, who would think that the United States of America would be the country in the world that locks up the most people per capita? You know, you have to think about the morality of that and why is that? And you look at our federal code, you look at the hundreds of thousands of these regulations with criminal penalties, you look at state codes. I mean, here's the thing, Pat. When state legislatures and Congress go to work every year, they're not going to work to take away, they're going to add. And you look at, I mean, oftentimes it is not unusual for state legislatures to pass several thousand bills every year. Many of those deal with their criminal codes. And you think about it, in a year, did we really need 1,000 fixes to our law? Probably not. But that is the system that we live in. And like I mentioned, President Trump doing away with a lot of these regulations. He's now cut 8 regulations on average for every one that he has added. That is unprecedented in the history of this country, in the history of the office of the presidency. Because again, that's not what elected leaders tend to focus on, not getting rid of, but they add to. And so we're kind of in this vicious cycle.
Jennifer, we want to talk, we can't do it right now, but I understand part 2 of this. We want to find out how much it's going to actually cost. And the whole idea, as I understand, they're farming the prison system out to private enterprise, and they in turn get their money from how many prisoners get incarcerated. So you'll tell us about that tomorrow? Absolutely. How much do you think it's going to be, the cost is from all this incarceration?
It's hundreds of billions of dollars, Pat. And as you mentioned, this private prison issue is, to many Americans, it's really outrageous.
Jennifer, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to talk to you about it, but listen, something has got to be done. We are a nation of criminals. Imagine this land of the free, home of the brave, and all that stuff we've got. Bring me your tired and huddled masses learning to be free and all that stuff that we feel is the heart and core of our American experience. And the fact that we lock up more people because of zealous legislators who want to go before the people and say, quote, we are tough on crime. Look what we have done. Look at all these criminals that are locked up. And then you've got 3 strikes and you're out. And a kid takes some gum at a candy store, he gets convicted of anything, and he can spend the rest of his life in prison. And if he's, he's 18 or 19, he's not quite in control of his brain. He doesn't quite know what he's doing, and he takes a joyride in a car, so he gets arrested. Then he becomes a felon, and the rest of his life, he has to report that he has a felony on his record, and he cannot vote. He cannot be a lawyer. He cannot be a police officer. I mean, it's pretty shocking. Ladies and gentlemen, something has got to be done. And if the president really wanted to do something big time to help the black people, we have all this business about Black Lives Matter, which I think is okay. Of course they matter. Of course they do. Of course people are suffering. But how are we going to fix it? Well, part of what we can fix it is we don't give them so many laws to enforce. And this is something that the cost is staggering. 300,000 to 400,000 criminal sanctions in our federal system right now, not to mention the state and local ones. A nation of criminals. Let's change it.
Amen.
It's horrible, isn't it?
Well, especially, it's horrible for anyone, but especially young people. You're right about that. Getting a job, even if you're not in for life, getting a job when you come out, the stigma that goes with that is just
do you have a criminal penalty? Yes. Okay.
Have you ever been arrested?
You're
Yes.
out. You're convicted. I mean, arrested. You can get arrested, but if you've been convicted, you've been convicted of a crime, Class 1, Class 2, Class 3 felony, and so forth. Well, in other news, believe it or not, President Trump and Joe Biden are on the same side of a volatile issue, and they're voicing their opinions loud and clear. John Jessup has more on that.
That is right, Pat. The national outcry to end police abuse has entered the race for the White House. Many on the left are calling to defund the police. And as Dale Hurd reports, that may create a problem for the presumptive Democratic nominee, Joe Biden.
What do you know? President Trump and Joe Biden actually agree on something. The two candidates are both rejecting calls to defund the police.
I don't support defunding the police.
President Trump says he's appalled by the idea.
There won't be defunding. There won't be dismantling of our police.
House and Senate Democrats then unveiled a sweeping police and criminal justice reform bill. Among other measures, it would ban chokeholds and no-knock warrants, give state attorneys general more independence to investigate alleged abuses, and make it easier for people to recover damages from police when their rights are violated.
Today, with the Justice in Policing Act, the Congress is standing with those fighting for justice and taking action.
Democratic lawmakers took a knee before introducing what they say is a long overdue response to racial injustices in law enforcement. George Floyd will be buried today in Houston, carried home in a horse-drawn carriage. Floyd, who was 46, will be laid to rest next to his mother.
This man whose death has changed the world, he's changed the world. You have to come. You know, you have to. I can't explain it.
The former police officer charged with murdering Floyd, Derek Chauvin, made a court appearance in Minneapolis via video feed and had his bail set at $1.25 million. Joe Biden met privately for more than an hour with Floyd's family, including his daughter Gianna. The protest and riots stemming from Floyd's death at the hands of police are taking center stage on the presidential campaign. A new CNN survey released on Monday shows Biden with a whopping 14-point lead over the president, 55 to 41%. Democrats hope to use the uproar over the George Floyd killing against President Trump. But on CBN News' Faith Nation program, chief political analyst David Brody said Biden's opposition to defunding the police pits him against the far left of his own party, which he needs to win the White House.
Joe Biden just said, no, I don't want to defund the police. And so clearly he's going to have to, he's putting his marker down in the center, in the more in the moderate lane. But that's not going to work for the far left. They're very active. They're very loud. And Biden needs all of them to mobilize against Trump. If he starts to fracture with them, that's a problem for him in November.
Meanwhile, a Minneapolis court has ordered the city to implement a series of structural changes in policing, banning neck restraints and chokeholds by officers. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Thanks, Dale. Turning to the economy, in case you hadn't guessed it already, it is now official. The U.S. economy did go into recession in February, and it could be the deepest on record. There is good news, though. It also could be the shortest recession we've ever seen. In fact, some analysts say it might already be over. The coronavirus lockdowns hit the economy hard, but now that states and cities are reopening, the economy is rebounding sharply. The unemployment rate is dropping and stocks are coming on strong, with the Nasdaq already hitting a new record high and the S&P 500 and Dow Jones Industrial Average also approaching record territory. Well, government relief and Federal Reserve policies have kept the economy afloat, but the federal spending has sent the deficit soaring. It's already near $2 trillion and could reach $3.7 trillion when the fiscal year ends in September. In a Monday press briefing at the White House, CBN's Ben Kennedy asked about the possibility of another relief bill.
Does President Trump think we need another coronavirus stimulus package? And if so,
What would he want to see in it before he signs it?
Yeah, he's remained open to a phase 4. There was some discussion about this. There was a meeting last week at the White House about that, actually. So won't get ahead of him, but he has said there are several things he wants. Payroll tax holiday was one of them because that directly advantages low-income workers. Several other things that he would like to see in the package. Won't get ahead of him, but he's certainly still open to a phase 4. But it can't be, as he's noted, just state and local bailouts for blue states that have run their states into the ground because of decades of Democrat policies.
And Pat, with sharp disagreements between Republicans and Democrats, that bill could still be weeks away.
Well, we'll see what happens. And, you know, sooner or later, folks, somebody's got to pay this stuff off. And the deficits are so huge. I don't think there's any way of bailing the world out. I think the biggest thing we've got to face right now is a financial collapse. And it's serious. The United States has spent, I mean, we talk about trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. It's just extraordinary. And when you look at the unfunded liabilities, it takes it up to maybe as much as $60 trillion. And then you go around the world and you see how much debt there is. And there's no engine that's capable at this point of moving the world economy. China is having difficulties. The other countries are having difficulties. And now we're facing the possibility not only of famine, but because of the locust infestation, we're also looking at the possibility of some type of a world war. So it's not a pleasant picture we're facing, but I'm very optimistic, and we'll stay that way. So.